right. Just by way of reminder, because now we've had and solved this particular problem. Be sure that with respect to Zoom, that you're upgrading to the most recent version because it can create problems. I had a problem about 3 weeks ago where I had a file from a saved class session that became corrupt. And what happened was I hadn't upgraded to the latest version of Zoom yet. I was going to wait till the weekend and do it, and I didn't. And the file was corrupted. What I found was that, I got a hold of Brady Hogan in IT. He said, upgrade to the latest version of Zoom. I did that. Instantly, the thing was fine. It converted fine. I was able to post it. So some of you, if you're having trouble connecting, or you get stuck in a waiting room or something like that, it's almost always, according to Brady, I talked to him this morning, it's a problem with having an older version of Zoom. So make sure that you're remaining current with that. The other thing is that when you upgrade to these versions, they often, not always, unfortunately, but often will also upgrade the security. And I know some of you very rightfully are concerned about people using Zoom to get personal information or, just make a nuisance of themselves. And Zoom is not, as things go, the most secure platform right now, especially given how widely used it is. So just another thing to think about. All right, now, I wanted to start talking about Machiavelli with reference to chapter 15. We're going to I'll just give you a flyover of these chapters so we get an idea of, well, what are the things I really need to remember, for a quiz or something. Okay. And chapter 15, really the only thing you need to remember there, we've talked about it a little bit, but this is where Machiavelli is trying to be specific. Okay. And he says that the prince, if you look at the conclusion there, the prince need not make himself uneasy at incurring a reproach for those vices without which the state can only be saved with difficulty. Now, first of all, notice, he's not just talking about, well, I'm a heroin addict. I better hide that from people. That has nothing to do with the state, okay? What he's talking about is the necessity of the prince to have to do things that are necessary for the preservation of the state, but that may look to others like vices, okay? And again, it all comes back to this idea, not of a self-indulgent prince, who's a psychopathic frat boy, but rather a prince who understands what needs to be done to protect the state, to protect the principality, and that you shouldn't worry about being reproached for those things, okay? Because if you don't do that, you don't save the state. Another implication there that you'll see comes up later is most people aren't going to know anyway. Most people aren't going to be able to tell what you're doing. Most people don't see the prince clearly, so they don't know if you're being faithful or not. They don't know really, unless somebody gets in who can see things and tells you, oh, the prince is lying. They're not going to know if you're lying, and they're not really much going to care. What's the primary concern of the people, according to Machiavelli?
Not being oppressed.
Not being oppressed. So as long as you don't dispossess them, break their families, take away their land, starve them, just be needlessly cruel, as long as you don't oppress them, they're probably going to roll with you. They're going to accept you. Okay. So that's really what's going on in chapter 15. Just take a glance at it. Chapter 16 is quite often misunderstood, particularly by American students who hear the word or see the word liberality, and they think, oh, you mean a leader shouldn't be liberal in a political sense or an ideological sense. And that's not what Machiavelli's talking about. When he's talking about liberality and meanness, what he means is sort of in the classical sense of liberality meaning generous and meanness being stingy, okay? And so when he's trying to caution here, he's trying to caution the prince to reconsider the idea of buying loyalty by appearing to be or being very liberal, spending a lot of money on public events or spending a lot of money on, well, in a modern sense, throwing a lot of subsidies at people just so they'll vote for you and things like that. Because his concern is sooner or later, you're going to impoverish yourself. You're going to incur debt. And since the debt of the prince is the debt of the principality, you're going to have to tax the people. Okay. Some people, like, for example, in the modern sense, people will criticize usually Democrats by saying, oh, if a Democrat is president or if Democrats control Congress, they're going to run up big debts because they're going to, they're going to take a bunch of money from us in taxes, and then they're going to spend it on government programs and all, you hear the expression like tax and spend Democrat or tax and spend liberal, that kind of thing. Okay. That's a kind of a carryover from that Machiavellian caution against being looked at as excessively liberal. In other words, it's like, geez, this is really great. Like, we have all these, we have some gladiatorial spectacle coming up. We get to watch some people slaughtered, and won't that be awesome? Well, it's expensive. Well, we're going to have fireworks and we're going to have pony rides for the kids and all this. It's expensive. And sooner or later, the check's going to come due. And the only way that a prince can subsidize those things is either out of the personal wealth of the prince or by taxing the people, the nobility and the people. Either way ultimately will undo you. And so what he's saying in chapter 16 is, don't worry if people think you're a little stingy. Just remind them that you're being fiscally responsible, that you don't want to impoverish the principality by being excessively lavish. Okay? Now, are there any questions on that? Does that make sense? And do you see how that notion of liberality is different from what Americans think of when they hear the word liberal? Okay. In chapter 17, I want to spend a little more time. And I asked you to think about this last class, so whether or not it's better to be feared or loved. What does Machiavelli say? So now I get to see who's read this and who hasn't.
He says it's better to be feared, right?
Why?
Because people don't as easily follow you if you use love. They're more likely, because it's a less strong bond than fear, I guess.
But again, why? He's really specific about this.
I don't remember.
You're there. I mean, that's fine. I just wanted to see how far you wanted to go before you were like, no, that's it. I'm done. That's fine. That's a very good start. So he's saying that there's something about the bond of what we normally consider to be loyalty or love, devotion, that's weaker than the bond of fear. Part of it is that he's saying people will love you, okay, when any kind of threat or cost of that loyalty is distant from us. Oh yeah, whatever you say, that's great, I'll do it. But when there's a crisis, when threats are close, okay, then all of a sudden you'll see people who are naturally cowardly, naturally pretty worthless. He has a very low opinion of people. That at that point they'll say, oh, well, I know I said I'd do that, but now I don't want to go to war. Or, I said that I understood how to sacrifice on behalf of the public. I don't want to wear a mask. No, I don't love you anymore. Okay? That's one thing. That people will just, it's easy for people to decide they don't love you anymore when it's going to cost them something. Another part of that is, if people don't fear your authority, okay, they're more likely to be subject to instability. In other words, part of this is there has to be a factor of respect and awe that's given to the prince, such that people think, no, I'm afraid of going against the law as set down by the prince, because I know there's going to be a price to pay if I do that. And it's right here. And guess who controls it? The prince. It's different from whether or not you choose to be loyal. The prince doesn't control that. Again, one of the admonitions about liberality, you think, well, I'll buy your loyalty. I'll give you bread and circuses. The problem is, as Machiavelli says in the previous chapter, what happens when you run out of money? No more loyalty. That's because you don't control it. The other person decides whether or not to be loyal to you, but you control fear. Okay, you control the fear that they have of what's going to happen if they step out of line or if they oppose you. That's the one you control. And by controlling that, it's not just that you're mean and scary. It's that you stabilize society. You can impose order on a society because people fear the consequences of violating that order. Okay. And so, that's why he says, the bond of fear is not easily broken because you don't control your fear. That's the whole thing about fear. It's something you no longer control. It's all well and good when people say, well, master your fear. Easy question to ask. How? I don't control it. Particularly if it's a really overpowering fear. Think about things like phobias, irrational fears. You don't control those. You really don't. In fact, they're an example of when you lose control of your own state of mind. But that's kind of what fear is. Fear is a kind of retreat to vulnerability. It's like, I can't stop this. There's nothing I can do. It terrifies me. I don't dare move against this. And because of that, then Machiavelli says, you're the prince. You're not the prince to be liked. Certainly not the prince to be loved. You're the prince to maintain the principality. And maintaining the principality requires stability and order. And you're going to have an easier time maintaining that if you rule on the basis of fear rather than love. Okay, does that make sense?
Could I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
What exactly do the people fear from the prince?
They fear punishment.
So that would be oppression, right?
No, it's not oppression. That's accountability. There's a difference between, oppression is an unjust, burden of coercion. In other words, we didn't do anything, there you are preying upon us, as opposed to, no, I know if I do something wrong, there will be a cost, there will be a punishment. It's like, if you have kids, right? If you're a responsible parent, you don't want your children to be terrified of you. That's really unhealthy and kind of pathological. But you want them to know, if I mess up, Dad's going to drop the hammer and it ain't going to be fun. Now, it doesn't mean he's going to beat the living shit out of me. Okay. It means this is going to cost me something I value. And I know he means it. Because then you're more likely to think, well, if he's that emphatic about it, it's probably something I should do. Remember when we talked about power as a capacity to persuade people to do what you need them to do? One of the most compelling ways to do that is somehow to convince people, you know what, it's what you want to do too. And if in order to do that, you have to remind people, look, this is a law. This is for the good of the whole society. And so we all have to understand, if you violate that law, there's a cost, there's a punishment. That's not oppression, that's government. Okay. According to Machiavelli. In other words, we're not good people only because we're good people. You don't follow the speed limit because you're a responsible driver. You do it because you fear the consequence of being caught speeding. That's why every time you see a cop, you look at your speedometer and you slow down. Okay? That's proof that you're not doing it because you're a good person. You're doing it because you're afraid of punishment. And it is really hard to say that something like a speed limit is oppression, unless you're a really profound libertarian. So Ross, does that make sense, the distinction I'm trying to draw?
Makes a lot of sense, yeah, thank you.
Okay, now again, this is according to Machiavelli. We can still dispute that. At what point does compliance become oppression? How far down the line will we accept, government intervention in our own lives and the government establishing law and order by, taking away from us some of our individual decision-making sovereignty? I mean, that's a constant question that's being asked in various societies. When people now today refuse to wear masks, for example, in the midst of a pandemic, a lot of times what they're saying, they're actually using the same argument that a lot of women have used with respect to abortion, which is, I have a right to choose what I do with my body. Okay, the difference is, right, if you choose not to have a child, no one else needs suffer because of that. And again, unless you see an identity in an unborn child, and then that's why that's still a debate. But what I mean is, it has relatively little direct social impact. But if you are likely to be the spreader of a very dangerous disease, okay, and you just say, well, that's tough, I have, I have rights as an individual and I don't have to worry about other people. No, you can be sanctioned for that. You don't have a right to do that. There's nothing under existing law that says that you have a right to endanger other people. Nothing at all. This isn't about saying, oh, we have to take out all the risks in society. It's like, this is a known risk that we know can be mitigated. There is no legal right, no natural right to violate that. None, not in any society, okay? But for a lot of people, it's like, no, making me wear a mask, making me socially distance from people, that's oppression. Well, that's a kind of a childish notion of what oppression is, especially for people who have ever lived under real oppression, okay? But you hear that a lot, okay? And by the way, you don't just hear it from people who vote for Donald Trump. I mean, I've heard that from people in Ashland and, whatever. So it's a kind of a hyper individualism that arrogates to the individual rights, even to the extent that they endanger others. Even liberalism, the philosophy of liberalism, which we'll come to when we look at John Locke, doesn't espouse that. You don't have a right to harm other people or to put people in harm's way. You don't have that right. You can't do that. That's why we have speed limits. That's why driving is not a right. Driving is a privilege, and it has to be renewed periodically. Right? And some states are much more strict about that. In some states, like every time you go in, you have to take at least a written test that shows I still have competence in understanding the rules of the road. But in many cases, after a certain amount of time, or if your license is taken away or something, you might have to take another driving test. Okay. Now, nobody in their right mind looks at that as oppression, because driving is not a right. You're not born with the right to drive. You have to justify the ability to be given permission to drive. Okay, so it's a privilege. It's not a right. All right, but that's not oppressive, because the consequence of not doing that would be having a bunch of people out on the road who absolutely don't know what they're doing, who would then endanger other people. It's why some people say, no, we don't want to eliminate the right to own firearms, but the state does have a right to encourage people to be more responsible about their ownership and stewardship of those firearms, okay? And that's why various states have different kinds of gun laws and things like that, because it tends to be a reflection of what the prevailing values within that state are. But if you took let's say the gun control laws of one state and you moved them to another, like if you took the gun control laws of California and dropped them into Texas, they might not fit, and people there might see them as oppressive. Okay, so Ross's question is perfectly legitimate in the modern sense. Okay, in all senses, though, what Machiavelli would argue is, do not do what the people will perceive as oppression. Be reluctant to do that. It's not the same thing as saying don't enforce the law. What it means is make damn sure that the people understand why you're doing what you're doing before you do it, because then they're less likely to see it as oppression. But they will fear the consequence of not complying. Okay, and so therefore they'll understand this isn't something that just because the prince is a psychopath. This is something because the prince embodies the law. Remember, this is before in many cases we have republics with elected legislatures and things like that. The law is the prince. The prince is the law. The prince is the state. Okay. What happens though if you push that too far, that notion of rule by fear? What risk do you run?
People plotting against you.
Well, again, if you're not oppressing them, then who would plot against you? For the most part, it's almost never going to be the people, because the people are politically unaware and naive and detached.
Be more likely to be the nobility.
Okay. Why would they plot against you?
I mean, if they see what you're doing is unjust or against their interests.
So what you have to then do is you have to find ways to intimidate them, to say, hey, you may not like this. What are you going to do about it? I am the prince. And that's happened in every single monarchy. There were always, nobles who had that hunger for power. And yet, the sovereign would sit there and say, yeah, what are you going to do about it? Or every once in a while you throw them a little bone. You can be, Duke of that little worthless, bunch of swamp over there. And isn't that nice? And it's certainly better than nothing. But the concern is, and this really sort of shows up in chapter 19. Yeah, you want to be feared, but you don't want people to despise you. You don't want them to hate you. Now, I don't expect that anybody's read that far, but this is what I want you to think about, is that, remember when we talked about Aristotle? And Aristotle talked about the best way to live is as a kind of a mean between extremes. Well, Machiavelli's not exactly an Aristotelian, but there is a sense at various times in which he's implying be balanced in what you do. Find an equilibrium, find a sort of sweet spot within which you can govern and you can get compliance and you can stimulate a sense of awe or respect or even fear, depending on what we're dealing with. But you don't cross that line either into being too soft or too liberal or too generous or being too harsh. The problem of being too soft or too liberal is you can't afford it. Sooner or later, you will impoverish the principality and or you will appear weak, okay? The problem of going too far down the road of inspiring fear, either fear among the nobility, this is where Owen was going, I think, or among the people, is if you just capriciously brutalize them, or like the nobility, if you just blatantly humiliate them in public, and you can think of examples of monarchs who've done that. Think about Caligula. One of the notorious things about Caligula was appointing a horse to the Senate. Okay. And the idea being they're no better than just these animals. You know, they're just like dumb animals. They're decorative, but they're dumb. And they do what I say. You're humiliating the Senate. Well, we know that created tremendous resentment among the Roman elite, particularly the more conservative, the more Republican Roman elite who supported the Senate, and would ultimately have led to his undoing, if in fact it did not. It depends on what your theory is on why and how he actually died at a relatively young age. But the idea there was that he became so unpredictable and so capricious in everything he did that everyone started to hate him. He did everything wrong. He used to put these big fairs on and these big, like carnival kinds of things, and they were incredibly decadent and funky, but it was decorative and exciting. Or he'd make all these public works and do all this stuff, spending money that the empire simply didn't have. Okay, and then he'd start taxing the nobles, who were the ones who had all the wealth. He'd tax the merchant class, and they would resent that. And after a while, they came to hate him. Okay, that's what you can't do. So what he's saying is, yeah, rule on the basis of fear rather. Don't rely on love, because it's too hard to maintain and it's too unreliable, right? But as you're cultivating in people this sense of fear and awe and respect and everything, be careful not to cross that line into doing something so outrageous that they hate you. The reasoning for that is pretty simple. The one way that you can overcome fear of someone is if you despise them. Think about, like, I don't know, see, you guys came of a generation when people really weren't allowed to bully anymore. But in my generation, when you were going to school, there were people, they were usually great big guys, right? And their job in school was to go around terrorizing people and beating the crap out of them at random. And so what had happened is, at first it'd be like, hey man, don't fool with fill in the blank, who was always big for his age, right? Don't do that, because he will thrill you. He will light you up. And after a while, either they'd run the schoolyard for a while, or some little smart ass like me would come along. And it was usually, oddly enough, not when somebody did something to me, but would do something to one of my friends or would do something to a girl. And then without realizing it, I'd go up and pop the guy. Okay. It's because, yeah, I was afraid, but that fear wasn't strong enough to keep me from trying to light him up, because I despised him. I actually saw him as beneath me. no decent guy would do that. You know, nobody but an animal would do that. And I'm going to beat this animal. Either that or I'm going to get wasted trying, you know. That's what Machiavelli's kind of talking about is if you're a bully, if you're capricious, if you're arbitrary in the way that you exercise the authority of the principality, sooner or later, either the nobility, the people, or both will come to despise you. They'll see you as incompetent, as foolish, as mean and rotten and nasty, and someone will take you down. Either the people will throw up someone from among them, right? Or the nobility will say, well, we have an alternative. Check this out, right? And they'll put somebody forward. And if the resentment and hatred of the people is so acute, they're much more likely, again, they may not be the ones conspiring to overthrow, but they'll buy into it. It's like, yeah, get rid of that savage beast that we had before. You know, Nero was terrible. Caligula was terrible. These people were horrible. They did horrible things. Get rid of them. You're not going to get a lot of resistance from the people because the person who steps forward is going to say, I can fix this. Someone asked earlier about the origins of fascism as a modern sense of this. An interesting analog to that is the rise of military dictatorships. I've seen just in my lifetime, but also seen in person, the rise of a number of military dictatorships. I've only been inside of 2 of them for any length of time. And one of the things I noticed was it's a common thread in this. Okay, and I actually studied in Nigeria, had a graduate seminar with one of the most prominent scholars of military dictatorships who was writing in the midst of a military dictatorship and trying desperately to stay out of prison, all right? And one of the things that was a common thread is they always come in and say, the civilian government was corrupt and decadent. We're gonna fix all that. They've taken all the wealth out of the country and they've put it in Swiss banks, you know, and in Nigeria, that was wealth generated from oil, all right? The same law that oppresses you, they just violate capriciously and without care. They're corrupt. And so it took us to intervene to restore order. And every one of those coups would come in with this slogan of ending corruption. Every one of them, okay? And so this is what can often happen. You know, if you have a more moderate or liberal or even conservative leader, right, who's ineffective, then often the military will step forward. Okay, now, not every fascist state is military, but the culture of every fascist state is militarized. So it's that same idea of being strictly authoritarian, rigidly hierarchical, usually having a maximum ruler, that kinds of stuff. That's fascism. That's most likely to occur in the wake of a discredited leadership. Think of the collapse of Weimar Germany in the 1930s and the rise of the Nazis, okay? Weimar Germany was a much more democratic system than, for example, anything the United States has ever seen. You had vibrant multi-party system, which became ultimately kind of chaotic because of the Depression and the costs of the settlement after the First World War. I mean, there were a lot of things that were destabilizing Germany, okay? The Weimar government couldn't cope with those things. And so through a variety of machinations, the Nazis took power. They took power as a minority. Now, Sarah's wondering, and I think probably a lot of you are wondering, is the United States heading in that direction? We could be. Yeah, we could be. Sure. A lot of people would argue that the reason why Donald Trump was elected, other than the obvious oddity, the anomaly of the Electoral College allowing someone who lost by almost 3 million votes to win the election, notwithstanding that, the reason he even got that much support was that Hillary Clinton was looked at fundamentally as corrupt, okay? One of the things that was striking about 2016, and again, I'm not going to make this an American politics class, but I'm trying to use this as an illustration of a couple of points that have been brought up. The 2016 election broke one very important record, okay? And it was that the unfavorable ratings for both candidates were higher than they'd ever been before. The highest unfavorable rate ever for a major party candidate running for office since we started recording these things was Donald Trump. His unfavorables were above 60%, and he won the election. But the second in the history of this kind of record, going all the way back at least as far as Truman, the second place finisher, Hillary Clinton. Neither one of them had at least 50% approval. They weren't even that close. They were both underwater. Okay. And so what a lot of people said was, well, people voted for Trump because they thought that Obama was corrupt, and they thought that Obama was giving the store away, or that Obama was appeasing terrorists. All these claims that Republicans had made, none, by the way, with any substance at all, for the most part. You know, there were plenty of, which is weird because there were plenty of ways the Republicans could have criticized Barack Obama. There were a lot of things the Obama administration did. Benghazi was bungled. It really was. But one of the things that stuck in people's heads was not what happened in Benghazi, but the way that Hillary Clinton shrugged it off. What difference does it make? Now, again, taken only slightly out of context, but manifest evidence for those who particularly watched Fox and only heard the line out of context, she doesn't care about us. Well, there was compelling reason to believe that she didn't. That she didn't care about young Americans. She didn't care about the cost of college, because until Bernie Sanders really gained power, she didn't say anything about it. You may remember that. I understand you were pretty young then, but in other words, she came off as hypocritical, corrupt, and elitist, all of which could be legitimate critiques of her. Okay, I mean, I would remind you that here America had a white woman running for president. 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump. Now the question is why? Did they want fascism? No. Is Donald Trump a fascist? No, he's a buffoon. Okay, he's not a fascist. He can't spell the word. He can't. I'm just saying, he can't. I mean, if anybody wants to call me out on that and think, oh, you must be a liberal. No, you're wrong and I'm not. But, not in the sense you mean. But there has been no less competent individual in the White House in my lifetime. That's a fact on the ground. Okay. Now, if you like that, that's fine. Then you should vote for Trump. But you need to understand, you're voting for someone who doesn't know what he's doing. But a lot of people, remember, said, we don't care. We want somebody who's going to shake things up. Yeah, but there's going to be chaos. Fine. Washington needs that. Okay. But you see, that's a compelling reason to vote. That kind of logic, shake them up, scare people, can bring in fascism. What would make fascism more likely right now would be, first of all, if Donald Trump really understood what he was doing and wasn't just in it for Donald Trump. If he really had a program for the state and he really, saw this as something other than just his ego, and we had evidence of that. And if the Republican Party unified behind that program, that would be a greater risk of fascism. Okay, but the Republican Party is not unified behind him in terms of his program because he doesn't have one. And the one thing about fascists, they have a program. They're going to nationalize the economy, right? They're going to discipline labor. They're going to eliminate the left, because the left is always a problem, right? Because the left is the loudest voice of dissent in every fascist regime. And so that's why they get killed. Because they're the only ones, they're the last people who will resist fascism, are people on the left. Because their idea is that fascism is backward looking. And to be left of center in politics typically means that you're forward looking. You're looking toward the future. Fascism sees a permanent, 1,000-year Reich, that kind of thing. That's not very future oriented. If you look at the belief systems of most fascist regimes, they're very primitive. They're even, in many cases like Germany, Nazi Germany, they're pre-Christian. Okay, they're old. Okay, so there are a lot of reasons why we are not fascist and aren't necessarily going fascist. But you don't have to go fascist in order to cease to function as a republic. Okay, there are many other kinds of dictatorship besides fascism. Okay, now to a certain extent, we do have a dictator right now. That's not inaccurate. You could make the case, okay. Some people would argue certainly that during the Depression and the Second World War, Franklin Roosevelt was tantamount to a dictator. We know that there were countervailing powers that could limit his ability to be an absolutist, okay? But he had extraordinary power. We also know that in the current American administration, there is a tremendous amount of support for expanding the power of the executive, the very thing they were trying to circumscribe when a Democrat was in the White House. So again, one of the reasons why you wouldn't necessarily call this regime fascist is they're too partisan to be fascist, right? In other words, they don't want really to expand executive authority necessarily and repress the people and have everybody marching in lines and wearing snappy uniforms. They just don't want Democrats in power. That's the primary program right now of the GOP. It's really the only thing that unifies that party other than protecting wealth is this idea that anything but a Democrat, okay? It's kind of like Democrats in the South during segregation. They didn't care. You could be the noblest human being in the world, but if you're a Republican, they would crush you simply because you were a Republican. Okay. So we can go off on a lot of tangents there. But with respect to Machiavelli, what Machiavelli would argue is, first of all, you don't allow that kind of factionalism. You have to stop it. You can't allow that. Remember, this is at a time when you didn't have anything like modern political parties. You didn't have parties in the mass. You had conspiracies and movements and things like that, but you didn't have parties and people voting along party lines and being members of political parties and all that. All that's very modern. Really, it's 20th century in the sense that we see them. And so the idea is you have to unify those factions. Well, how do you do that? Discipline. You have to have discipline. And then you impose that discipline on the principality. Okay, so are there any questions about that? I mean, we covered a lot of ground there, but I think I brought it back to Machiavelli. But I also think it is incumbent upon me to try to, even if your questions are a little bit peripheral, I try to answer them. All right, let me ask you, when you hear these principles that Machiavelli is espousing, there are two things you need to do, right? One of them is, do you understand them? But the second one is, do you agree with them? And that's personal, that's you. Okay, that's not part of your grade, but think about that. Is it more important for us to fear our government or to love it? What do you think?
I think it really depends, like, in our way of government, like who the person is in charge.
Well, then that means it's not the government, it's a person.
Yeah, so I guess.
So what you're saying actually is, remember our discussion of institutions. The idea of institutions is they're more powerful than any individual, right? But what you're saying is not in America, because our loyalty to the government is contingent upon whether or not we love the president. That's dictatorship. That's the predicate of dictatorship, personal rule. If you believe in personal rule, right? In other words, I hate this government, but I liked Obama, so I like the government better. Especially without knowing, well, what's the government doing? I don't know, I just like it better. Why? Because Obama's president, okay? You're allowing someone to have power over you that they haven't really earned, because they haven't even shown you what they're going to do. I mean, this is what frustrated a lot of people about Obama. One of the things he said was, well, we're going to close down Guantanamo Bay. We're going to try all of the people who are imprisoned there in American courts and find out whether or not they're guilty of the crimes for which they've been imprisoned by the United States military. Now, we know, a lot of people said we could never do that. We've already done it. The first people who tried to blow up the World Trade Center in 1993 were ultimately prosecuted under American law. And you know where they are now? They're either dead or they're in supermax prisons. And they're never going to get out. And you know what? It worked. And it worked fine. Absolutely, we can do it. But Obama didn't do it. And a lot of people criticized him for that and said, well, wait a minute, that was an important thing you declared you were going to do, and you failed. You didn't do that. When Bill Clinton was running for president in 1992, I don't know if I mentioned this before in this class, but one of the things, this always stuck in my head, because I remember, I don't know why, because I didn't watch MTV that much then, but I remember hearing him say it. And it was it was like Rock the Vote or something. And he was asked, what would you do? Because at this time, there was a ban on anyone who was gay or lesbian serving in the United States military, okay? What would you do about that? He said, I'd use my powers as commander-in-chief and get rid of it. You know, in other words, he said right there, and there'll be no more ban on gays in the military. Now, again, he did not support same-sex marriage. Either, by the way, did Hillary Clinton. In fact, she continued to oppose it long after even her husband. Okay. But the idea was a lot of people believed that. A lot of younger voters were inspired by that. A lot of compassionate voters who were like, no, we need to be more tolerant and we need to stop doing this. And also, you know, we need to stop politicizing the military, and putting a ban on someone because of their sexuality serving in the military is nonsense. That's what we used to say about race. Well, the military must be segregated. And then, you know, in the wake of Harry Truman, we decided, no, I guess it's not very important, is it? And you know what? It worked out. Nothing's perfect, but it worked out. Okay. But as soon as he gets into office, he immediately backtracks on it. And instead, in fact, he did something even worse in a lot of people's minds. He gave it to a Republican-controlled House, controlled by Newt Gingrich. And they passed the Defense of Marriage Act, and they passed the Don't Ask, Don't Tell. In other words, it wasn't like making the military more inclusive and tolerant. It was encouraging people to lie. That's not very enlightened. And it's not even a good compromise. But that was Bill Clinton. That was the way he governed, you know. And a lot of people were really disgusted by that, okay? Because for them, it gets back to one of the things Machiavelli points out. We have a visibility with our candidates before they take office that wasn't the case in the 1500s. And a lot of us we heard Barack Obama promise to shut down Gitmo. We heard Clinton promise to eliminate the ban on service by gay and lesbian Americans. We heard those things. He said, and they were both said categorically, particularly Clinton's. He was just, I mean, he didn't hesitate. That was what he was going to do. Okay. And then we watched them betray that trust. And we watched it on television. Okay. So unlike in Machiavelli's time, for us, it's sort of harder to deceive now because so much more of what our politicians do is visible now. In other words, we don't see them at the tremendous remove that we did, 500 years ago. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Because a lot of the model of power that Machiavelli's talking about with respect to the people is predicated on this idea that other people don't really see who's leading, and they really don't care, because again, they don't vote, they don't read, there's no TV, much less Twitter, there's nothing like that. So the only reports they get of what the principality is doing with respect to government is when somebody comes to oppress them, and as long as they don't see that happening, and if there's a problem, they get help, they're satisfied. Well, we're not like that anymore. We're not like that. Okay, so
probably use like Bush Sr. as another example of that, right? With the whole read my lips thing, and then backtracking on that.
Well, the problem with using that as an example, it's perfectly legitimate, was that people who were really paying attention knew that he had to say that to get lockstep Republican support.
Right.
But we have every reason to believe that George H.W. Bush understood that given that recession and its persistence, they were probably going to have to change the tax structure. Okay, and they did, all right. And a lot of people said, oh, that cost him 1992. I'm not sure that it did. I'm not sure that there's a lot of evidence that it did, but it certainly didn't help. It didn't help. I mean, remember, a lot of that was Ross Perot running in 1992, having a strong third-party candidate whose views were, for the most part, slightly right of center, especially his economic views. That probably hurt someone who was a relatively moderate Republican in George H.W. Bush. Okay. But it's a good example, right? I mean, that looks like someone who didn't keep faith. So when Machiavelli's talking about at least appearing to keep faith, that's what he's talking about. You know, if you say you stand for something, then you at least got to look like you stand for it. And if you're going to violate that stance, you have to anticipate what people's reaction to that's going to be. And you either have to obscure it, don't let them see it, or you have to find a way to justify it. So you see how even in a relatively absolutist environment like this, 16th century principality, you still have Machiavelli saying, you know what? You got to be able to spin things. You have to be able to deceive, because if you lie too much and too inexpertly, you're going to be held accountable, especially if, with respect to the people, part of that lie is, I will not oppress you. Okay. One of the things that Jimmy Carter said that stuck in people's heads, first of all, they'd never really heard a presidential candidate say this, was, I will not lie to you. Why do you think he said that? I will not lie to you.
Because of Nixon was still pretty fresh in people's heads.
Not only Nixon, but Ford's pardon of Nixon.
Right.
That's what people forget. You're not wrong, Owen, but one of the real big senses of corruption and betrayal was Gerald Ford saying, once he became president, no, I can't see a reason to pardon Richard Nixon. Because saying, I won't do it, and then within a month doing it. And by the way, pardoning him unconditionally, even for anything he may have done. Completely sweeping pardon, allowing Nixon to be more or less rehabilitated. So long, and the agreement was, you will never hold public office again. But allowing him to kind of clean up his image, and because at that point, that's all he had left was his reputation. He was never going to have real power anymore. But that was looked at as a lie. Well, it was a lie, because it's pretty clear that that negotiation was already underway when Gerald Ford became president. When Nixon resigned, part of the condition of Nixon resigning, we think now, we have good evidence, was, and I will be pardoned by the guy I handpicked to be my vice president. And a lot of people forget, why did he have Gerald Ford as vice president? Because his vice president had to leave office because he was indicted for extortion. That's pretty good. So again, it's not don't commit crimes. It's, first of all, don't commit crimes just for self-interest. Machiavelli nowhere justifies that. But also, if you have to commit crimes for the sake of the state, cover them up. Keep them quiet. Because either the nobility or the people will reject you and begin to despise you if they see that as a pattern. So that's kind of what he's talking about. So far what we've got here is, if we go back, just a real quick flyover. There are a lot of things for which the prince is going to be praised or blamed. Don't let that bother you. Do the things you have to do. Don't worry about moral and ethical judgments. Worry about performance. Worry about protecting and stabilizing the principality, and you'll be okay. All right. In terms of liberality and meanness, if you have to go one way or the other, be stingy. Don't waste money. People don't respect it. Don't buy loyalty. People don't respect it. And ultimately, it will impoverish you. And then you're going to have to raise taxes, or you're going to have to go out and plunder somebody else and take their, that means you're going to have to get people to fight your war for you. Either way, you're imposing what might be an insupportable burden on your nobility and your people. If you do that, they will get rid of you because they will come to despise you. Okay. And then as you're doing these things, don't be afraid to have people fear you. That can be to your advantage because you control fear much more than you control whether or not people love you. Imagine, just think of your personal lives, right? And when you first decided that you were really fond of someone who wasn't in your family, right? And a lot of times the typical thing is, well, I wonder if they feel about me the same way I feel about them, but you're kind of afraid to ask. And then you're wondering, then you're always wondering, does he or she really love me, and all this kind of nonsense. And first of all, the easy answer to that is no. No. And you know what? Either do you. Because watch them do something you don't like, and all of a sudden you don't love them anymore. I guess it wasn't that strong. But we don't like to think that, because we like to think that, there's nothing stronger than the bond of love that I feel for my significant other. Okay, you say so. Whatever. It's easy to break. You know how? Let them cheat on you. Again, that's why deception is important, and that's why so many intimate relationships are characterized by deception. I didn't do anything. Nothing happened. You're all going to deal with this at least once. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your sexuality is or anything else. Everyone betrays trust sooner or later. Everyone does. And everyone has that trust betrayed. Everyone. It is what human beings do. We do nothing better than that. We're good at it. Because, most of us, when push comes to shove, are thinking about self-preservation. Whether the self means our personal safety, our reputation, our security, whatever it is. We're going to do that. It's one of those times when human beings really do get selfish, is in a monogamous relationship. And so this is why, with respect to the political component of that, the kind of cult of personality that Isabel was suggesting a lot of Americans might live under when they say, well, I admire this leader, therefore I approve of what the government's doing. A lot of Americans do that. And not just Americans, but we do. If we like whoever's in office, we're more likely to say that we approve of the job they're doing in office, even if we have no idea what that job is. That is exactly what Isabel was implying, I think, is it depends on how much we like the individual. Yeah, it does. It really does. But you need to understand that's also a precursor to authoritarianism. It's called a cult of personality. The notion of a charismatic leader who can come in and take power and personalize control. That goes against the idea of an institutionalized state and equal protection and all those things that we think we value in a republic. We'll throw a lot of those things aside for a leader who we like. We will do, not us. I mean, as Americans, us as people, we will. The right kind of leader comes in there and be like, well, it had to happen. I watched my father do that with Richard Nixon. He would just justify everything Nixon did. And I'd sit there and think, God, because I love my dad and he's a really smart guy, but I used to watch him and think, it's like he's hypnotized. He can't see what I see. He couldn't see what a scumbag Richard Nixon had become. I remember watching Nixon's resignation speech, and my dad saying, I don't think you could have done that any better. And I'm thinking, he resigned in disgrace. He could have done it a lot better. He could have not done the things that got him to resign in disgrace, but I'm not going to say that to my dad. First of all, at that time, he probably would have taken a left hook at me, because he's a scary dude. But you know what I'm saying? In other words, we have to be careful of that variable of love or the cult of personality. And even Machiavelli warns us of that. Don't rely on that. It's too easy to betray that. But it's a lot harder to betray fear. It's like, well, I hate that son of a bitch, but I'm not going to do anything. Why? Well, because if I do, they're going to put me in prison. I don't think we've had a president.
Cult of personality thing has you think that's become more important since the advent of things like TV?
No, I honestly don't. No, I don't. Look at Franklin Roosevelt. No one ever saw him on a television. No one knew that he couldn't walk, but they loved him. They heard that voice and they were like, yeah, that's Roosevelt. Unless you were a Republican. But remember, by then the Republicans were a minority party. The Democrats became a majority party. They loved that guy. I mean, they elected him 4 times, right? That's like obsession in a way. Winston Churchill, another one. The Brits just loved the guy right up to the point where they didn't anymore. And then they got rid of it. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's more profound now than it was in sort of a radio generation or something like that. Because, I mean, Mussolini, remember that a lot of Italians loved that guy. That wasn't television. Hitler, whether they'll admit it or not, a lot of Germany thought that guy was fabulous. People were asked, well, didn't you know what was happening to, gypsies and communists and homosexuals and Jews? I didn't know. Yeah, they did. They just didn't care. Because they got what they wanted, right up to the point where they didn't get it anymore. His own military rebelled against him because he humiliated them. He put them into unwinnable conditions when he advanced on the Eastern Front. He did all these stupid, crazy things, but he was able to initiate those things largely because he had this charismatic personality. You watch the stock footage of those Nuremberg rallies and see what that reminds you of. I mean, that's fascism. Everybody in lockstep, a lot of people in uniform, everybody just, it's all orchestrated, but people get swept up in that. You'll see people will get swept up in that stuff. If you've ever gone to a large rally, you'll feel yourself kind of gravitationally drawn toward that. And unless you're a complete institutional cynic like me, you'll find yourself agreeing. I saw it happen to otherwise responsible adults, not realizing you are being fed a shovel full of shit here. This is garbage in social science terms, right? And they wouldn't be able, and then they'd get out of there, and it was like hypnosis, because then the spell would be broken, and you'd have to talk them back down from their little high of, it's at the core of every charismatic religion. Same thing. You see it all the time.
So what kind of effect do you think, the advent of TV and like mass media has had on that like charismatic leadership quality? Because, I've always heard about in history classes, like, oh, how bad Nixon looked on television and how great Kennedy looked and blah, 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 and how that, was ultimately not what helped Nixon or one of the things.
Well, the problem with that, and it's a common trope, is that it ignores the fact that television is what got Nixon elected in 1968. It's part of what got him elected in 1968. Remember that he only got about 43% of the vote, but Roger Ailes and Treleaven and a lot of those guys, they worked in television. They weren't political animals first. They were image makers. And they found ways to present a guy who was kind of awkward and ungainly and strange looking and everything, but they found ways to present him so that he looked good on television. Television made his campaign, because one of the things they figured out as far as mistakes he'd made in 1960 was trying to be too physical, too aggressive, to campaign too vigorously, and he wore himself down. He had a bad knee and he became ill, and a lot of it, he had lost. You could tell from those debates, he looks like his suits don't fit right or anything. He dropped a bunch of weight. What also people don't realize, Kennedy was pumped full of drugs. He absolutely was. He had a very debilitating central nervous disease, right? That one of the symptoms of it is this kind of severe weakness and this inability, the lack of energy and everything. So he was getting shots of speed all the time so that he could get out and do that stuff. But he was unhealthy. It's an open question in a lot of people's minds as to whether or not he would physically have survived the second term. But you never heard about that. You'd hear about nothing but that now. So one of the things that's changed with television is, I think, two. One is the illusion of intimacy. It makes us believe we really are seeing something important, when usually we're not. Okay. Look at how seldom, especially in campaign coverage, but increasingly that's all the news media do with politics anyways, campaign coverage, no matter when they do it. Look at how little you hear of substance. Look at how little you hear of policies. Well, what did this politician, what did this party, what did they do 10 years ago? What did they do 15 years ago? What did they do 3 weeks ago? You almost never get that. Okay. You're more likely to get that in print. All right. But in television, you're going to get little 6-8 second blips of things. And you're going to get the illusion that you've just learned something. You're going to get the illusion that you've just seen something because you feel closer to it. So a lot of television is image and illusion. Okay. Radio could do that to a certain extent. Roosevelt could maintain his cult of personality in part because more people heard him than saw him. And they didn't realize how ill he was, especially in the last years of his life. And again, there were millions of Americans who had no idea that he could not physically walk by himself. Okay. You couldn't do that under the glare of television. You just couldn't do that anymore. So it's not that it hasn't had an effect, but it hasn't had the effect that most people think, which is that ugly people don't get to be president. Washington, D.C. is routinely referred to as Hollywood for ugly people. Okay, and the idea there is there's a certain kind of thing that we won't accept in an actor, but we will accept in a politician. It's important to be decorative, and politicians strive to be decorative, but they're not all decorative. All things being equal, the decorative one often, but not always, has the advantage. But most of that is illusory. It's an illusion. It's an image. It has nothing much to do with reality, because most of what you get from television isn't real. If you watch, Donald Trump just recently criticized CNN. He did it kind of blunt force trauma, but he criticized CNN, I think with some justification, for sort of doing all COVID all the time. With this job that I do, even not doing any more consulting or anything like that, just with this job, I need news every morning. And when I watch MSNBC and CNN, almost all I get is this gibberish on what the polls are saying in the campaign. What's the most outrageous thing Donald Trump just said? Oh yeah, COVID, 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 COVID. So he's not wrong. He might be wrong, on other things. And he might be right for the wrong reason. But there is a sense that television will lock onto a story that is easy to bring to the audience. And COVID right now is easy. They've actually institutionalized their coverage of the pandemic. They have the same medical advisors they go to. They have the same maps they look at in terms of which states have more or fewer infections and positivity rates and all that. All that's all set up. It took a little bit of effort to do it, so they just keep replicating. Because particularly since the 1980s, American news media have been, across the board, have been compelled to cut their budgets. So what you're getting is like this low budget coverage of the most complex republic the planet has ever seen. And it's always going to be then garbage. It's not fake news. Trump is wrong there. It's not that it's fake, but it's grossly incomplete. There's so much going on in the world right now that you're not hearing about if you just watch, CNN or MSNBC, or get on your Twitter feed or whatever, or Facebook or wherever you get your news now, that really the source of what you're getting is those things. There's not much substance to that. Television has never been a medium characterized by substance, never, ever. And it's even less so now. That, I would say, is accurate. Yeah. All right. This is going to happen a lot, and I don't worry about it, where we'll talk about somebody, from the 16th century, and then we'll bring it to, modern times. I think that's fine. What tells me is that you're trying to find ways to apply these general principles to the experience that you're in the middle of right now. I think that's perfect. That's what you should be doing. That's how you will learn these concepts, by applying them to your own lives, So that's good. But I think I've probably taken you as far as I can go. All right, now, I know that a lot of you have not yet had a chance to read. What I'm asking you to do before Monday is read those chapters, okay? Chapter 9 and chapters 15 through 19. And then also, because some of you haven't even done this yet, watch the video on Machiavelli, okay? All this stuff is condensed into something. You watch that a couple of times, that stuff will stick in your head. And it will really, not only will it help you on whatever assignment we do, but it'll be more likely that you're going to be able to keep those ideas in the front of your brain and apply them. We got a campaign going on right now that is at least as important as any we've seen in my life, for a variety of reasons. And you're all old enough to vote in it. I'd rather have you do that from a position of being informed. It's one of the reasons why I'm always reluctant to criticize contemporary leaders unless I do it in an even-handed way. I don't ever want, even inadvertently, to appear to be supporting one party or candidate over another. First of all, it's against the law. I can't do that. But also, I don't think it's appropriate. And just so you know, I don't have any use for either one of them. Neither one of them is someone I would think of as presidential. So there, we're done with that, right? I'm not even trying to convince you to vote. If you don't want to vote, don't vote, okay? But you better figure out another way to exercise your preferences, because you're going to be stuck with whatever we get, come November 3rd. Well, it won't be November 3rd. It might be November 30th before we really know, but that's the way reality is sometimes. All right, any questions on anything we've covered so far today? Okay, everyone looks tired, so I'm gonna make you go away then. But please do the reading. You got to do the reading. It's college. That's what you do in college. You read. You read and get into bad relationships. That's college, okay? And those things, and by the way, you drink beer. What can I say? Maybe you shouldn't, but you will. You know what your generation doesn't do, though? Really? You don't drink. Most of you are like, you get prescriptions for things and stuff. I get that. But you guys don't just like slam beers. I'm not saying you should. It's just like, my God. I started drinking beer in middle school. You guys don't know how to live. You don't smoke, you don't drink, you don't have sex, you don't do anything. My God. It's like, being an adult, you can finally do these things, But of course, they're all dangerous and fraught with perils. So that might be why you don't do it. Yeah. I just realized that I have recorded that. Oh, well, yeah, I'll stand by it. Have some fun. Jesus. All right. Anyway, I'll see you, I hope. If I don't get fired by then, I will see you. I will see you on Monday, or whoever replaces me.
Thank you.
Okay, I see you.